Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. And friends, I want to talk about courage. That is our big topic today. Courage in your work, courage in your personal life, courage in your family and in your relationships. How can we become more courageous in life? And well, my special guest today, I was recommended to her from a beloved friend and fan favorite, Dr. Gary Chapman. He said, I have the perfect girl that you need to talk to on this particular topic. And her advice is actually going to be something that you're not expecting in any way, shape, or form. So here she is. Her name is Dr. Deb Gorton, and she is the Gary Chapman Chair of Marriage, Family Ministry, and Therapy at Moody Theological Seminary and Graduate School. Now, for more than 14 years, Deb has worked as a change agent for individuals, organizations, and emerging leaders, helping them refine, embrace, and thrive in their purpose. Built on the foundation of relationship, her core philosophy is that collaboration and community produces radical transformation. And hey, she's a podcaster as well. She's the host of the Becoming Well podcast. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Dr. Deb Gorton. Hey, Dr. Deb.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. And I love this topic because we haven't simplified this quite yet. And here's the thing. I'm just going to throw the spoiler alert out right at the beginning of our conversation. Your book specifically tells me that the first step to building up more courage is all about embracing being uncomfortable. Now, first, tell me, why is that the first step? And talk to me about the myth of comfort.
Yeah, I know, right? Write a book called Embracing Uncomfortable. It's not necessarily something people are like jazzed to pick up off the shelf. But for me, it was a really personal journey. And I talk a lot about my story in the book. And it comes from just seeing in my own life and in the clients I work with. I'm a clinical psychologist. And it's this idea that if we really want to live out what's most important to us, our core values, our purpose, our everyday decisions oftentimes necessitate this willingness to embrace uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so often, unfortunately, I think we default to comfort or our habit. And we may feel a sense of safety in the moment, but the long-term outcome is often a greater sense of discomfort. So what I love about the practice, to maybe encourage some people, is it's really kind of flipping itself on the edge. It's saying, okay, in the moment, I'm going to embrace courage and to step into the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And the long-term outcome is living congruent with your values and your purpose, which brings such a greater sense of contentment.
Yeah. So who here actually raise your hand if you want to become uncomfortable in life? I'm willing to bet very, very few people are going, oh, you know what? That's a great idea. Let's become uncomfortable today. That would be amazing. But the truth is, though, Dr. Deb, we do it every single day. Every single day we make choices that are not aligned with actually our identity. What we believe we are like is us living uncomfortably every single day. Why do we do that as humans?
Oh, well, again, I think it's oftentimes it's habit, right? I think how often in the day do you actually pause and make an intentional practice of thinking about, how have my decisions today reflected what's most important to me?
Yeah.
I know I'm guilty. Like I get going in my day and it's really easy to just kind of get into the momentum of everything going on. And again, discomfort is, by the very definition, something we typically try to avoid. So if we're not intentional in our decision making, oftentimes we're just really quick to write off those things that, seem like they are going to take more effort and energy or are maybe countercultural to the world's values. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really what is the reason why we're stuck in the pattern of comfort, and also what it takes to get uncomfortable is a commitment to pausing every day, moments throughout the day to say, okay, is what I'm doing now really reflective of what's most important to me?
Yeah. And you know what I think is interesting talking about the greater society, the world out there, they market it to us, right? I mean, there's comfy pajamas, there's comfort food, there is the whole, what is it, Swedish or Norwegian movement of huggy, like, to make a cozy space in your house and get snuggled down. And, I'll be the first to admit I have some very comfortable pajamas and slippers that I do love in the winter. And who doesn't like a cozy nook in their house to read books and things? But I think what you're talking about is different. This kind of comfort where, we make choices that are not aligned with who we actually believe we are. That's a whole other different realm, right?
Yeah, it totally is. I love that you made that distinction because comfort in and of itself isn't bad, right? I don't want to send the message like you can't ever be comfortable.
Right.
No, comfort is a good thing. And I think it is important that we have comfy pajamas and that comfy nook in our house because we need to rejuvenate and create a sense of Sabbath and rest.
Yeah.
But this type of comfort is more of, I like to look at it like a discipline. Right? It's almost like hiding comfort. Like I'm going to hide in safety versus, again, I love that you talk so much about courage versus take that courageous step to really be congruent to what's most important to me.
Yeah, because I mean that I can think of one very clear example in my own personal life. I'm not significantly overweight, but I'm certainly not a size 8. So and I do know the basic premise of living a healthy life: eat better food, sleep more, stress less, exercise more, all the things. But then there's an incongruence to the choices I make for what I cook for dinner, or how I grocery shop, or do I spend time actually, prepping the vegetables that are in my refrigerator or letting them go off,
Yeah.
So let's talk about core values, right? Like what role does understanding your core values play when you're actually navigating the everyday decisions that we make in life? And I think it's the little bitty decisions that start to compound, right?
Yeah. And yes. And I want to highlight that. This is all about those smaller decisions. We get stuck in the bigger ones, and I think it can almost paralyze us because it becomes overwhelming and these goals become insurmountable. But our core values are, think about it like those markers on a map that keep you going in the right direction. So I love how you brought up health and wellness. Let's just say, for example, that's a core value.
Yeah.
Well, that is going to be then the filter through which you make your decisions, which again, I live in Chicago. Chicago is like allegedly the foodie capital of at least the United States. I mean, there's amazing restaurants on every corner, and I could eat out and eat very unhealthy food all the time, and it tastes delicious. But at the end of the day, if health and wellness is a core value of mine, then I need to consider, okay, in this decision of what I'm choosing to eat or purchase from the grocery store or sleep in versus get up and go for a walk, if I really want to choose consistent with my values, I've got to recognize there's a loss here, but there's also a tremendous gain. And it's uncomfortable. But if I'm willing to embrace it, guaranteed, I mean, I talk in my book about walking for a year. There were days where I didn't want to walk to work. And yet the discomfort of getting up, getting ready, going on that walk paled in comparison to the comfort and contentment I felt looking back after a year of walking and going, oh my gosh, I did it.
And I mean, even what a simple experiment that is. Actually, it's funny you should say that because I did that earlier today. I could have very easily hailed an Uber and it would have cost about £8 or wherever to go from point A to point B. But then I thought, it is a beautiful day. Why don't I walk a portion of this journey and end up spending £4 on an Uber later, at the end. But it is amazing how the changes that are necessary to actually lead a healthy, thriving, more courageous life sometimes aren't the big ones. It is the little stuff that adds up over time, right?
It totally is. And there's this concept I talk about in the book that I think is really critical to this whole practice. And it's this idea of radical acceptance. And radical acceptance is, I think, somebody told me this years ago. They had this kind of epiphany moment lying in bed. And they said, okay, I need to get up and go to the gym, but I don't want to. And all of a sudden they thought, I don't think I'm ever going to want to get up and go to the gym. That's just not something I really enjoy doing, but it's good for me.
Yeah.
And radical acceptance is, okay, these are my circumstances. I may not like them. I may not have chosen to be here, but they are what they are. And so what do I want to do in the midst of this? So I may not really feel this sense of excitement or joy or, a draw to go for this long walk. But if I put it in the context of what's most important to me, I can choose to do that, even in the moment if I feel a sense of, kind of dread or discomfort in making that choice.
I mean, it's a very powerful point. It makes me think of nutritionist Carly Polak. We've had her on the podcast a couple of times, and one of the things she's taught me over the years is decision stacking, which is basically where if you don't like going to the gym, can you stack a reward on top of it that makes it a little bit more appealing, whether that's, a favorite playlist of music you listen to in the car to kind of get you going, or, a cup of tea after the workout's done. The same thing if going for walks and things. So you don't really love the process of walking your dog in yucky weather. Can you pop in some earbuds or listen to your favorite podcast or something like that to make it a little bit less yucky? I mean, that's the bottom line. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Kind of putting these little rewards in there to keep you motivated and moving. That's good. Absolutely. So, one of the things that I picked up from your book was every decision doesn't just have a gain, but there's also a loss. Talk to me about what that means.
Yeah, I really think this principle is so important. I think most of the time we're very focused, like you said, on gains, on accomplishments, on what I get out of this decision. And yet I have this saying that actually was a professor of mine in graduate school used to say, and I remember he would say, just remember every decision involves a loss. And I thought, well, that's really pessimistic and glass half empty. But I realized, no, it's true. Yeah. And so often when we're not focusing on the loss, we actually incur losses that are huge and in stark contrast to our values. So I think about let's just talk about somebody who's overcommitting at work, or saying yes to a lot of things, which I can be very guilty of doing. And I think about, this is a great opportunity. This is a new relationship that I'm building that's going to create an entirely new network of connections, or it really speaks to my leadership skills or my giftings and abilities. Yeah. And yet on the flip side, the yes means that I'm also losing out quality time to take care of myself, time to spend with my family, time to Sabbath and rest. And when I start to think about the losses in my decision, it really forces me to say, okay, is this something that I want to fully embrace as a core part of where I'm at in my life right now? And again, it goes back to that piece of oftentimes I think we can even have that thought process and realize what the loss is, but still feel like saying no is so uncomfortable because we're going to disappoint people, we're going to let people down, we're going to miss an opportunity. Yeah. But again, that comes back to our core values. If we're really making that commitment to live according to our values, then we make the decision to say no. And we say, okay, this is uncomfortable in the moment, but it's not going to be that way forever.
Right. And, I could see that framework lays over very nicely in many aspects of running a business, but also in personal life. Do you take that client and that piece of work or not? Do you offer that discount or not? Do you raise your prices or offer a new product or service out in the world that maybe you're not familiar with as much or not? But then on the personal side, do I eat the whole pizza or do I go for salad a bit tonight? Do I go and force myself to get outside and get out in the sunshine or do a bit of exercise? Or do I just let the next episode on Netflix run automatically? And also how we approach our relationships. Do I have those hard conversations that have been needing to be said with my outside voice for months? Or not? Do I let the resentment and anger and passive aggressiveness kind of boil up till it explodes like a volcano? Don't know who I'm talking about there, but obviously there are decisions in our life that, we avoid because they're uncomfortable. So let's talk about this whole concept of short-term uncomfortable versus long-term. What's the difference between the two? And let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's this idea like, let me use the story that I talk about in the book, this idea that I made a commitment to walk to and from work for a year. And I live about 2 miles from my work. Like I said, I live in Chicago. For those listeners that don't know Chicago weather, it gets very, very, very cold in the
Like
winter.
stupidly cold there,
Like
right?
stupidly cold. Yes. Like you go outside and you breathe and all your nose hairs freeze. You're like, this is so weird. And I grew up in Arizona, which is desert hot, like 120 degrees Fahrenheit
Yeah.
in the middle of summer. So I made this commitment in July. And it's summer in Chicago is beautiful. So it was great. It was sunny. It was, very comfortably weather-wise. And then November hit, December, January, and I was like, what was I thinking? It's dark, it's cold, my bed is comfortable. It
Yeah.
takes me 40 to 45 minutes to walk to work because I kind of stroll. And so every day for probably a good month, I was like, this is a terrible decision, but I kept doing it. And I'll say I'm pretty stubborn. So I think the beginning parts of it were like, you made the commitment, you're going to follow through. But as I started to really think and process, which was also one of the reasons why I decided to walk, it gave me this reflection time. I realized in the moment that discomfort of getting up and walking was short term. Like by the time I was out walking, I was no longer too uncomfortable. I mean, it was cold, but I wasn't, mourning the loss of sleep and the warmth of my bed. And at the end of that time, like the contentment and the satisfaction that I felt in following through on that commitment was huge. And that's kind of, a parallel example to the things in our lives. Like I think about, when we have conflict with a close friend or a spouse or a coworker, and we make that difficult decision to come to the table and to say, hey, I think maybe I've done something here that has caused this conflict, and I would love to talk through this and see what I need to take responsibility for. Those aren't easy conversations, but if it creates a stronger sense of relationship and community, guaranteed we're going to feel better about that decision in the long run than the momentary discomfort of having a difficult conversation in the short term.
Right. So what I hear in what you just said there is, the conversations that we avoid having, whether it's with clients or family or relationships that are important to us, we avoid them in the short term because we're like, I don't want to avoid, confrontation. Oh, it's going to make everything awkward and weird. But then perpetuates this long-term uncomfortableness of like, just, man, this is not a fulfilling relationship, or this is getting worse and worse and worse over time. So the things that we avoid doing now are actually putting us in more uncomfortable situations in a long-term state. And so what I hear is all about boundaries, setting healthy boundaries, communicating healthy boundaries. Talk to me about that. Any tips there?
Yeah. And again, recognizing that that's not easy. I don't know that I've encountered a lot of people who've said, oh, one of my favorite things in life is setting healthy boundaries. It's hard. It's going to feel challenging. It's going to feel anxiety provoking. But again, it goes back to that idea of every decision involving a loss. And so when we think about it from that perspective, if I say yes to this, I'm going to miss out on time with my family.
Yep.
Now, there may be a season in your life where that yes is a necessary. Like it's going to get you to that place where, oh, this is a job opportunity that for a season we're going to have to juggle a bit more. But are we intentionally taking the yes with the gains and the yes with the losses? And then there are going to be times where you have to say no. I mean, if it's according to your values, right? And setting that boundary. And I think if we do it, with respect, with healthy communication, even though, and I've had this experience, I said no to something not too long ago, and the person was really upset about it. They were not happy. And yet it was, I believe, the right decision. And it took a little bit of time, but they came back around and they recognized as well it was the right decision because I was conscious in how I communicated that.
Right. And it makes me think about the 4 agreements, right? Like, don't take anything personally. That's one big thing. And I think that a lot of us that maybe grew up in a household that was praised for people pleasing. We don't want to disappoint people. We don't want to let them down. We don't want to, so we go the extra mile, whatever it takes, And I would say that if anybody's listening that is an entrepreneur and has a core value on your company's website that is whatever it takes, just to take a moment and again pause and reflect on if that truly is aligned and if that is truly serving your clients. Because I think boundaries, I can think certainly about wedding planners that are out there that give their clients their cell phone number and then, brides and grooms call them, mostly brides, at 10 o'clock at night or text them at 10 o'clock at night. And that's after hours. And
yeah.
On one hand, yes, you want to be whatever it takes on the big day. 100%. This is coming from experience as a wedding planner. But I don't know if I necessarily agree with the, letting your clients have full access to you 24/7 months and months and months before the wedding. So just a thought.
That's interesting. What comes to mind with that too is this idea of failure, right? This that we oftentimes say yes to things out of fear of being a failure. And I am on this campaign for us to create a new relationship with failure, because I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I'm going to guess that at some point in your life you've failed.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
big time.
Me too. Yep. Me too. Big time. And yet what happens in those moments so often is we're so afraid of failure because it's gone from being a situation and an emotion to an identity. And so I want us to reorient our relationship to failure because it's going to happen. And we can be angry about that. That's valid. We can be afraid and we can be anxious about that. Totally valid. But failure is not an identity. And I think if we can kind of shift our perspective there, perhaps then setting those boundaries isn't as scary. It's still going to be scary, but maybe it's not as scary because it doesn't have a direct bearing on our identity.
Well, I mean, the classic example just to that, the rebuttal I will always give, and people go, oh, actually, that makes a lot of sense. If you are, having a cough and a cold and it's not COVID-19 and you call your doctor at 9 o'clock at night on a Tuesday and guess what? She doesn't answer the phone. You get voicemail. Do you go, well, I am firing that doctor? No, you leave a voicemail. You probably look up a few things on Google and you get a phone call from her the next day, right? So, any of those that are out there that are listening that, have crazy 24/7 office hours and you're a small business owner, just think about that as an example as well.
That's great. I love it.
So I want to shift gears a little bit. So what do you think keeps people from living a more courageous life? And how do we start to squash some of these excuses? What are the three primary excuses you hear coming up all the time?
Yeah, I talk a lot about what I call the three haters to change, which is justification, minimization, and denial. And again, I would say probably the root of it is fear, whether it's fear of failure, whether it's, fear of inadequacy, fear of lack of accomplishment.
Yeah.
But those three haters to change, justification, it's basically kind of digging your heels in and giving every excuse in the book for why you're doing what you're doing, which is really then avoiding the reality of the circumstance.
Yeah.
Minimizing is exactly like it sounds. It's kind of reducing the impact of your decision on yourself and on others. So it's functioning from a place that's not realistic. It's saying, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's not having that big of an impact on me and my health and well-being. So I'm taking phone calls at 10 o'clock at night, but I'm up anyway. It's not too big of a deal. Yeah, it's a pause on a Netflix show. And then denial. Denial is probably the hardest one because, again, it's an unwillingness to acknowledge that the problem is even there.
Yeah.
But those three things really do prevent us from seeking that transformational change that's so critical to living out what's most important to us.
And I imagine in the justification realm as well, it's like, oh, that change is going to take a lot of time and effort, and I don't quite have all the supplies. I got to go to Target or whatever you think in your head. Like, oh, I can't do that because I don't have blah, 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 blah. It's interesting that the things that we rationalize in our mind is like, oh, I need this before I can even start doing this. And how very rarely does that actually hold up when you look at it and examine it a bit?
Yeah, it's so true. Well, and again, sometimes the justification, the things that you're justifying may be true, right? So let's say if I want to get this many clients, I need to put in this amount of work. And so you're justifying, well, yeah, I got to work these hours because I got to get these clients and I got to get this website done and all these things. And that may very well be true. You may need to do those things to get to that point, but is getting to that point in that manner, again, consistent with your core values.
Yeah.
And that may be where the loss is, that you say, okay, I do want to get to this point, but for the sake of my health, my family's health, my emotional, physical, spiritual, you fill in the blank health, I'm going to go a different route than the status quo or the standard cultural norm.
Yeah, and what I hear in that, which I think is really key and critical to pick up on, is I think sometimes we think there are certain rules of play, into life or running a business, or it's supposed to look like this. And, I have found now that I'm in my early 40s of just going, like stepping back and going like, is this still true? Is this still hold up? Does this still serve me or my family or my clients or beyond? I think having that moment of reflection, the pause, as you say, I think is really powerful to go, oh, well, hang on. Maybe that was true 5 years ago or even last month, as fast as things are changing right now in the year 2020. But yeah, I mean, just giving yourself that space to meditate, pray, journal, whatever, to ask yourself, is it still true?
Yeah. And is it true for me? Like, just because it's true for somebody else,
that's right,
doesn't mean it needs to be true for me too.
That's right. Yeah. So talk to me about, you said it a little bit earlier in our conversation, radical acceptance. What does that mean? And what's the difference between that and validation?
Yeah. So radical acceptance, I think, is oftentimes misunderstood. I mean, it's a new concept for many people, I would imagine. But I want to clarify one thing. I think people assume radical acceptance is, or default to, is resignation, like it's giving up. It's kind of saying, well, it is what it is. And it's not. Radical acceptance is simply saying, these are my circumstances in the moment. And it needs to partner with validation, because I think we can kind of get stuck in one place or another. Validation is kind of that saying of like, this is what you're experiencing. This is what you're going through. It's either seeking it from somebody else, saying to a close friend or a spouse or a trusted confidant, hey, I need you to just tell me that what I'm feeling is what I'm feeling. It's not right or wrong, good or bad. We don't put qualifications on it, but it's simply saying, yeah, this would be really hard. This is really overwhelming. This is really sad. These are your circumstances. This is kind of what I need to radically accept in the moment. And why it's so important is it's where we're at. So if we want to move in another direction, we need to have that sense of, this is where I'm coming from. This is what I'm navigating within. And oftentimes with my clients, I kind of conceptualize it in this way. I'll say to them, okay, well, it sounds to me you want option A. Like option A is your ideal. I want to be able to have my cake and eat it too. Yet option A isn't an option. And you're so stuck in wanting it to be that you're unable to see that while B and C aren't your number one choices, there's still a lot of amazing things that you can gain from choosing B or C. But you've got to radically accept that A isn't on the table, and then validate the emotions that come with that.
Yeah. And I mean, gosh, think about all the massive change that we all have faced in different ways in this year with the pandemic and all things that are happening in our world. There's a huge flux of change. I mean, I think about parents who have kids who are graduating high school and not getting to experience, high school graduation or their prom or what, college is like in a real sense. And there's that grief of, this ideal or this thing that you've been working towards that all of a sudden has slipped right out of your fingers. But what I think is really interesting, and, I've certainly have dealt with different varying levels of loss in the last few months or even the last couple of years. What I think is really interesting, at least in my world, is it has very little to do with what's actually happened to you in the world, the things that, happen in the world today. But it's more about my perception of what's happened to me, like how I actually perceive who I am still in this, and how am I going to react or respond to what's happened? Is that the same for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do, we kind of get this sort of I think of the Clydesdale horses, with their blinders on, and it's really easy to look at things from our own perspective. And that's why, to me, it's so critical that we have community in our lives, speaking into our experiences, giving insight into how we're viewing the world, and really diverse community is critical there.
Totally.
And so that for me challenges me, but it also takes me holding myself accountable to having a posture of listening to understand versus listening to respond. And that can be difficult, right? When we have those experiences that we see as reality, when in reality, they may be our experiences, but that doesn't mean they're everyone's experiences.
And what a very good point about community. I 100% agree. We are so much better together than we are trying to push an elephant up the mountain by ourselves, whatever your elephant might be. But, you're absolutely right in diversity, too. I know that either within my church or, my neighborhood as well, some of the most rich conversations I've had are with people who look nothing like me, the 70-year-old neighbor who comes from a completely different background, the Republican versus the Democrat, the this versus that. Like the greatest learning for my life has been when I am talking to people outside of my echo chamber. And those conversations can be uncomfortable. Like extremely so,
Yeah.
That's where the growth is.
Yeah. And I think we have to ask ourselves in that moment, like, why is this uncomfortable to me? And why might that be preventing me from actually engaging in a conversation where I'm willing to receive versus feeling like I just need to give?
Yeah. That I'm the guru that knows all the things. Hey, imagine that. I don't actually know all the things. As I get older, I realize I know less and less than I actually thought I did originally.
Same here.
Imagine.
How about that? Wisdom with age, right?
Yeah, who knew? Well, Deb, I really appreciated your book. And if you guys are listening and intrigued about it, her book is called Embracing Uncomfortable, Facing Our Fears While Pursuing Our Purpose. And like I said at the very beginning, if you're thinking, uncomfortable, that's the last thing I want. Let me just say, it's well worth a read because you might find that there is wisdom inside this book that could break something new open, that sparks a new idea inside you, both personally or professionally. So this book is available wherever books are sold, your local bookshop as well. I'm sure you can find it there. So Dr. Deb, I have a few questions for you that I'd like to ask everybody as they come on the podcast. And again, thanks so much for your time today. So one question is this. Tell us, what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that you is either inspiring you or maybe poking holes and challenging your belief system?
Yeah. One book I absolutely love that I'm reading right now is called I'm Still Here. It's by Austin Channing Brown. The tagline is Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness, I believe, if I got that right. But I'm Still Here is the main title. And I love Austin's writing because she talks about from personal experience, but also practical tools for how to really engage in the conversation around diversity, especially in the workplace, but to really hear a personal narrative of somebody who encountered a lot of systemic racism and discrimination in the workplace, and so I really recommend that book. It's an awesome read and really enlightening and important, especially today.
Yeah, thank you so much for that recommendation. We'll put this link for this book and all other things that we talked about in this episode in our show notes at thesimplifierspodcast.com, so you can find it all there. But I mean, gosh, I really feel like in the last few months, especially, more and more people are realizing that these are conversations we need to have if we haven't already. And yes, they are uncomfortable, but yes, there is so much room for learning and growth and empathy and understanding. Great recommendation.
Thanks.
So tell me, who's one person in your network, somebody that you know personally, you just feel is up to brilliant things, and we could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we might even interview them on the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. So if you read my book, you'll hear about somebody named Patty. This is my best friend, Patty Martinez. And she is a middle school educator in the heart of Chicago. She is born and raised in Chicago. She's first generation Mexican American, and she works with primarily Hispanic students. And her example to me is just unbelievable. But to see her in a season in the midst of a global pandemic, in the midst of Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in America, not to mention the world. And to see her be a champion for her students and for communities of color that she grew up in, and to just consistently be willing to step into uncomfortable, because she's not, she's oftentimes in these circles where she's not, she might be the only person in the room who has her skin color and her cultural background and her experiences, and yet she is always fighting for her students and for their growth and their development and their success as future leaders in this world. And so she is a tremendous example to me every day of what it looks like to just constantly get up and make this commitment to embrace uncomfortable, not only for her transformation, but more importantly, for the transformation of the lives of her students, which she absolutely sees as impacting the future of our city, our country, and our world.
Yeah, thank you so much for recommending Patty, because I think about our school educators and, I think about it in this terms, especially in relation to your book, is that when you equip young minds with the tools they need to make sound decisions that are truly aligned with what they believe in and their identity. And I know this is true for myself. When I do that myself, I feel empowered and I feel stronger internally as well as externally. And that gives me the confidence to make decisions, bigger decisions later down the line. And there it is. That's how you build courage, is seeing that when you are making decisions from a aligned place, you grow in confidence, you stand with your shoulders rolled back, you show up differently in the world, and that's how we make change, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it gives us a sense of hope for the future.
100%. Yeah. So people can find you online at debgorton.com. Is there any social media channel that you like to hang out at the most where people can connect with you?
Yeah, I'm probably on Instagram the most, Deb Gorton on Instagram.
Perfect.
Yep, and Twitter and Facebook too, same handle, so you can find me there.
Fabulous. We'll put all those links in the show notes for people so they can check it out. So my last question for you is this, and before I ask it, I just want to acknowledge you. I think this is an excellent book, and I'm so pleased to see the work that you're doing out in the world, so keep going. You're on the right path.
Thank you.
Someone somewhere is listening to this episode right now, and she is got a big decision ahead of her, like a big one, not just what she's having for dinner, but like a big one. She's at a crossroads and she is feeling everything except courageous right now in this moment. What's one thing that you could just whisper into her ear right now, just to encourage her in this moment?
I would honestly whisper, you can do this. And whatever the outcome of this decision is, remember that it has no bearing on your identity and your worth as a human being.
Yeah. So just do it.
Just do it. Yeah. And if you need encouragement, shoot me an email and I will remind you of that.
Brilliant. Oh, Dr. Deb, big love to you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It was great to be here.